Wysteria, energy, twister. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and to the world of fairies. So now we are on the Anglesey. Anglesey is one of the fairy islands. It's an actual island. It's located off the coast, the western coast of England in the Irish Sea, south of the Isle of Man. In addition to being populated by humans, it is said to be the home of the race of fae known as the Tylwyth. It is not uncommon for locals of Anglesey to claim to be descended from the fae. Angus. Angus was a fairy from Irish folklore whose sweet little kisses would turn into birds. Well, that's different. Angus Oak. Born the son of the Tuatha de Danann, Dagda, and a fairy queen of the Sea, Angus O, the Lord of Love, resided in his castle, Bro na Bonny, in Ireland. It was said he owned a cloak of invisibility and had the magical ability to not only shapeshift into a swan, but also control time. He fell in love with a swan maiden, Ibelmeath, but she was only able to take human form every other year. As swans, they lived on Loch Dracon, where it was said anyone who heard them singing their love song together would fall into a magical sleep. When in human form, they resided in Bronnabonny. The Anhanga. Anhanga was an ancient forest or vegetation fairy from the folklore of the Tupi people of Brazil. He guarded animals, field game, and the forest. Anyone who would hunt an animal with young ran the risk of being struck with fever or madness. Anhanga was described as taking the form of a white deer with red eyes. In more modern times, the fairy spirit has been demonized and made out to be an evil entity, when in actual fact it's just a protector. The Anigrides, or also known as the Anigreides. Classical Greek mythology, the Anigrides were the naiads of the river Anigros in Elis, in the Peloponnesus, southern Greece. It was believed their springs could cure skin diseases. Anippe. The Anippe was a nymph from the mythology of classical Greece and Rome, one of the naiads. She was born of the Nile River as one of the daughters of the god Poseidon, and was the mother of Busiris, king of Egypt. Las Añanas. In Hispanic lore, the Añanas were small female fairies who appeared to mankind as old women in order to test their charity and compassion for animals. If the person passes the test, the Añanas would reveal itself in its true form, a young and beautiful maiden with long golden hair and blue eyes, carrying a golden staff, wearing green stockings and clothes made of flowers and star silver. Anything the staff touched turned into an item of value. Anku. The variations of Anku's name is Death, the Grim Reaper, and Father Time. In the fairy lore of Brittany, Anku, Death, was similar to the Grim Reaper. He also appeared in the fairy lore in Cornwall and in Wales. In Britain, as well as in the fairy lore of Ireland, the singular individual was described as looking like a man dressed in dark robes. Sometimes he was said to drive a black cart pulled by 4 black horses. Other reports say he was headless. Rare reports say he has 2 skeleton assistants who hurl bodies upon his cart. He travels the countryside along a particular path. Typically, he appeared at dusk, active all year long. He was especially powerful on November. Obviously, October 31st. It's called November Eve back then, but now, as you know, it's All Hallows Eve. This benevolent and comforting fae collected the souls of those who died and took them to Summerlands. Anku was a personification of death, and to see him was a sure sign of your imminent death. An old Irish proverb claims, when Anku comes, he will not go away empty. In Brittany, each parish had its own king of the dead, Anku, the last man to die each calendar year. Never holding the office for more than a year, the Anku was said to be seen entering into a house when a tenant's death was near, making a banshee, a very, very mournful crying, it is said, to alert the people, of course. So it has kind of the similarities to like the Banshee where it screams, but it's also sort of a death omen, which is kind of like the Banshee anyway, you know. Anna Perenna, a nymph from ancient Italian lore. Anna Perenna was once worshipped by the ancient Romans. Sacrifices, both public and private, were offered to her. She was associated with the river Numicus, and her feast day celebrated on March the 15th. Her grove and spring were identified at the Piazza Euclide in Rome. The Aeneid, a naiad from the mythology of classical Greece and Rome. The Anna. Anna was one of the many dwarves, again, in the Voluspa, very famous poems from AD. Anthedon. Anthedon was a nymph of the town of Anthedon in Boeotia, in the mythology of classical Greece and Rome. Anthusai. Now, whether it's spelled, it can either end in one I or two I's, but it also can either have one S or two S's in it. It just depends. Anthusai. It's ancient Greek mythology, and it's the Anthusai were the nymphs of flowers. Anthracia. Anthracia was a nymph in one of the Oceanid. She was charged with the care and feeding of the infant god Zeus. In art, she's always depicted holding a torch. Anthrachia, a nymph who lived on Mount Lycaeus in Arcadia, southern Greece. Anthrachia was one of the nurses to the infant god Zeus. Anthropophagi. Anthropophagi. A flesh-eating fairy from British lore. The anthropophagi preyed upon humans when hungry. Headless, their eyes are located in their shoulders, the mouse in the middle of their chest. Having no nose benefited them, allowing them to consume human flesh without gagging. Also appeared in William Shakespeare's play The Merry Wives of Windsor and Othello. Antiope. Antiope was a nymph from classical Greek mythology. She was born the daughter of the river god, Asopus. Antiope was driven insane by the god Dionysus Bacchus, which caused her to wander Greece aimlessly. Ultimately, she was cured by Phoeus, who married her. And we're not going to do that one because we've already done the Iobehel. We did She's a Banshee from Ireland. The Aeode, one of the original three muses, according to Pausanias, a 2nd century Greek geographer. Apparently she was song or voice of muse, like singing was associated with Mount Helicon as well, so she's associated with that sort of area. Epsiinic. The Epsiinic was a type of fairy or dwarf from the folklore of the Montagnese of Labrador, Canada, living in the mountains wilderness. These little people stood only a foot or two tall, but their presence was associated with danger. The Apsiinic had the ability to appear any place at will and were known to steal human children. The Apoiore. The Apoiore is a benevolent nature spirit from the folklore of the Tupi Guarani people of the Amazonian. So they make sure that Earth receives the right amount of rainwater necessary for sustaining life. But apparently it's said they also carried news of earthly events to a supreme deity. Some sources claim there was not a singular entity because it was rather a species of fae in general. Apopa. In the folklore from Inuit, in the Helmuet people of North America, the Apopa were dwarf-like creatures, deformed and hideously ugly. These fairies behaved much like the kobold of Europe and Puck from classical mythology. They were mischievous, never benevolent, but relatively harmless. As some sources claim, Apopa was a singular entity and not a species of fae. Apota, Apotamkin, known as also the Apotamponka. The Maliseet Passamaquoddy people of the northeastern coast of the United States of America have in their mythology a fairy animal called the Apotamkin, described as looking like an extremely hairy humanoid with enormous teeth. It predates on children who wander out on thin ice, venture onto a beach alone, or otherwise misbehave. I think it means it says predates, but what it actually means is it hunts it hunts children. It's essentially like a nursery bogey. It's like a boogeyman, you know. The Apias. So the Apias is like a subspecies of the Naiad from Greek mythology. She was an nymph who lived in the Appian well located near the temple of Venus Genetrix. The well itself was said to be surrounded by statues of nymphs called the Apiaides. Apple Tree Man. In folklore from Cornwall, Devon, and Somerset, England, the fairy spirit resided in the oldest tree in the orchard and was given the title of the Appleman Tree to ensure a good crop each year on the eve of Epiphany, January the 5th. The farmer and his hands took a pail of good cider and roasted apples to the apple tree man's tree. Toasting him, they said, "Health to tea, old apple tree, well to bear pocketfuls, hassfuls, pecksfuls, bushful." Any remaining cider was poured over the tree's roots to a cheering crowd. Absuides, a sea nymph born of Nereus and Doris in Greek mythology. She also was known as the Shiner as well, and was one of the named Nereid who accompanied Thetis in mourning the loss of her son Achilles. Apu. The Apu is Lord. These were mountain spirits of the Andes Mountains. They were a part of the mountain itself, but were able to move about freely. Apu played a part in the religion practiced by the Acuchia people of Peru. Each mountain peak in the Andes has its own Apu. They appeared as helpful, playful, but mischievous children. Typically, an Apu was male, but there were some females of the species, and they were referred to as Mama. Apuku. Apuku fairy spirits from Afro-South American folklore of Suriname. The Apuku lived in clearings found naturally in the bush and jungle. Described as looking like dwarves from European mythologies, the Apuku had a frightening appearance and were powerfully built, apparently. The Aralu. Now it also has other variations of name, the Pazuzu and the Utuku. Now, also I want to bring this to mind that Pazuzu also was a very bad man who did very bad things, and we're talking years back, but his story is out there if you look for it. Pazuzu, Pazozo, he was just a very bad man, okay? So I'm not sure why it correlates with this, but Aralu is a type of jinn in the Babylonian demonology born from the Bible of Enki and the stagnant water under the Kur. They were described as the storm which breaks loose with fury in the skies, or the rising wind which casts darkness over the bright day. They were depicted as having a human male body, the head and the paws of a lion, large wings, and a small goat horns upon their head. They were extremely powerful, immortal beings, and had the power to cause disease, corrupt the unity of family, inspire criminal acts, and kill livestock. When they possessed a person, a very powerful exorcist was required to exorcise and cast them out. They hate mankind, and there's no way to appease them. They were the adversaries of the gods, especially the moon god, Nana or Sin. According to mythology, an eclipse was caused when they attacked him. They tied him up in a sack, causing him to have to fight his way out. Fortunately, there was finite numbers of Aralu, as they were all male and could not reproduce. Araptes. Araptes was the female forest fae from the folklore of the Mari people of Russia, only appearing after nightfall and in bathhouses. They were described as looking like a pretty young girl. We're not going to do Arcadia because we did it in the other fairies, so there's no need to, obviously. Arethusa. She's also known as Arethusa, classic Greek and Roman mythology. She was one of the named Nereid nymph of the Mediterranean Sea in general. According to Greek mythology, she was seen as Alpheus, a river spirit. She emerged from the water to embrace others. And there's a big story about Arethusa and Alpheus, apparently. She went to embrace him, or he went to embrace her, and there was a rejection anyway. She rejected his attention and fled, appealing to the goddess Artemis for help. Her prayers were answered by the Nereid found she had been moved to another place, Sicily. She was transformed into a stream anyway, so that she could get away from him. But there's many stories regarding that, and there's so much speculation to research it all and go into it all. It's really extreme. The Agante, also known as the Morgane, the Silver Queen, a fairy queen, one of the queens of the island of Avalon. She appeared only once in the Arthurian lore, in the first English translation of the story written near the end of the 12th century by a parish priest named Layamon. In the story, Arthur was mortally wounded. With his dying breath, asked to be taken to see the fairest of Fae, Argonite, or Argante, who could heal him, enabling him to return home to Britain. Because of this, some scholars believe Argante was a title that could be given, and one granted Morgan le Fay. Others feel Argante was a queen in her own right, and separate individual from the king's half-sister. Who knows, she could be either or either, right? It's kind of hard to tell with these. You just never know. There's so many different myths. How can you tell, right? And that's the next part of our world of fairies. Please come back for the next episode. We'll learn about all the other interesting beings as we go along, because we have a really long list to get through, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please hit that like, share if you can, and also consider subscribing. Many blessings. Wysteria, energy, twister.